Americans will vote in the midterm elections in fewer than 3 weeks. The latest CBS News polling predicts if the elections were held today, Democrats would win 226 seats in the House of Representatives, 8 more than the 218 needed to take control. House Speaker Paul Ryan is not running for re-election, but he is campaigning for fellow Republicans like New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. We talked about issues that matter to voters and whether the tax cut they are running on has ballooned the deficit, plus the spread of tribalism in politics. Are Republicans going to keep the House?
I think we are. I feel pretty good about it.
Why?
I think our voter enthusiasm is where it needs to be. And more importantly, we have a great record to run on. The agenda that we ran on in 2016 is the agenda that we executed in 2017 and 2018, and it's working. The economy is booming. The military is being rebuilt. The Veterans Administration has been overhauled. We have deregulated businesses so they can hire again.
Congresswoman, when we talked last, when you were at the table for CBS This Morning, you said it was a tough political climate. Why?
Well, I think there's a lot of volatility, John, in terms of the media pace. It is faster than any time I've experienced. But I'm very proud to be running on my record of results.
Mr. Speaker, you helped pass a tax cut. There's a Gallup poll that says only 39% of the country approves of that tax cut. 46% does not. And 51% say the tax cuts have not helped financially. So that doesn't seem like a very good record. People don't seem to be buying it.
I think the narrative and the political rhetoric is obviously mixed on this. But when you break it down into its component parts, it's overwhelmingly popular. People are excited at the fact they're going to have a doubled child tax credit this year. People like the fact that their standard deduction has been doubled.
But when you say break it down into its component parts, that's exactly what they said about the Affordable Care Act, which had this kind of dismal approval, so that it's just people aren't feeling it. And you say wages are up, but
keeping more money in your own pocket versus paying higher health insurance premiums, I think the answer is pretty clear on this. People like the fact that they're getting bonuses, that 90% of American workers have bigger paychecks this year.
Fiscal policy, speaking of that, Mr. Speaker, we have new deficit numbers, $779 billion in this last year, added to the deficit, $523 billion in interest payments. That's the highest on record. That deficit number is the biggest since 2012 when we were in a recession. If this were a situation where you were trying to regain control of the House, you would be talking about the deficit from beginning to end of your speeches. But now you're on the hook for it.
Revenues are up this year. Believe it or not, we cut taxes at the beginning of the year, and we have higher revenues this year. Why do we have higher revenues? Because we have faster economic growth, higher wages, more taxes are coming into the government.
You say you have higher revenues, but
no, CBO says we have higher revenues.
But if you account for inflation, if you account for some of those revenues come from previous tax policy before this bill, and then if you take into account the revenue that would increase from population, revenues are lower than they should be. Let me just say it this way. As a result,
we cut taxes and we have higher revenues coming into the government today. Still,
but you know that number's a wobbly number, and that it's actually lower than it would be had the policy remained.
If the economy didn't grow, that's exactly right. But the economy did grow as a result of these policies. No, we had 4.2% growth in this last quarter. That higher economic growth brings in more revenues.
I've actually produced more than the promises I made. How often do you hear that?
You've seen some of President Trump's rallies. Do those rallies accentuate the things that unite us, the bipartisan achievements, or are they do they do something very successful in politics, wildly successful, which is sow division in the country?
Yeah.
Do you see that happening at his rallies?
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes meaning?
Well, not always, but sometimes. I worry about tribal identity politics becoming the new norm of how politics is waged. As conservatives, we always thought this was sort of a left-wing Alinsky thing. Unfortunately, the right practices identity politics now as well.
You've talked about inclusive politics, which tries to unify. Does President Trump practice those kind of politics?
Sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't.
How? But I mean, come on, honestly.
Sometimes look on economic growth and on tax reform, on getting the military and helping veterans. Those are things that he has led us to that have really brought people together.
I think this election is going to be focused on results versus resistance. What I know does not resonate with voters is this resistance effort where, regardless of whether you agree with some of the focus of this administration, you're unwilling to work with them. So I think both parties need to address the tribalism that's happening.
That was a spirited conversation.
No, I'm wondering, John, when it was over, did he go, "Nice to see you, John Dickerson"?
No. You know, Speaker Ryan, we've had these conversations over a long time, and he answers the question, then, and then you go back and forth, which is what's known as an interview.
No.
So.
No, but you went after. You said, no, but really. And that's where he got a little flustered.
Well, here's the thing. He has devoted his life to a very different style of politics.
Yes.
And he admits that that style of politics is not in vogue. Another style has been very successful. Donald Trump has remade the Republican Party in his image, but that's not the Paul Ryan image. So what's more effective?
What's he going to do?
Oh, Paul Ryan?
Well, he says he wants to talk about this idea of tribalism in politics. One of the things we discussed was how do you do that from the outside when in the inside the instinct is always to try and get things done. He also wants to go back and try and do some work on poverty. He spent a long time out of the spotlight trying to work on the issue of poverty. I think he wants to work on that. He wants to spend some time with his kids in the backyard doing nothing.
Yeah, it was spirited, but it was respectful.
Yeah,
All
sure.
his
Well,
questions
that's
were
what we
fair.
go for.
Nice interview.